Okay, welcome back. Well, a bit of good news in the country in the midst of all that seems not so good is that Nigeria's oil and gas earnings is up more than 60%, in fact 60.42% to 18.18 trillion naira in the first 8 months of 2022. That's according to numbers from the Central Bank of Nigeria. This 60.42% is compared to $25.47 billion in the corresponding period in 2021. For 2 months now, we've seen that the country's crude oil production has increased above 1 million barrels, and Nigeria has overtaken Angola again. So Nigeria is now the leading producer of oil on the continent after 2 months, but we have not yet hit that quota of 1.8 million barrels a day, which is what OPEC has given to Nigeria. I know the last time I had this conversation with Professor Damilola Olawi, SAN, we were talking about oil theft and how Nigeria had dropped. That was in July. On the opposite side now, we're talking about Nigeria has regained that. Prof, good morning. Director of the Institute for Oil and Gas Environment, Energy and Sustainability Development Institute, Afe Babala University, joining us from Qatar. Sorry, let me just ask, did you watch the match? I hope you did not turn to an Argentines, when they were rejoicing over the winnings.
That was a very tough match to watch, but I enjoyed every bit of it. Thank you very much.
All right, so let's go to the business of the day now, Prof. So the last time I had you on the show was in July, and we were talking about the issue of oil thefts and, of course, the reduction in the outputs of crude in Nigeria. And 2 months now, we've seen a recovery. Is it enough? Is it enough for us to celebrate yet?
Well, thank you very much. It's encouraging and commendable, I must say. Like you mentioned, we were very the picture was very discouraging the last time we spoke, and now that we've made some progress, I think it's encouraging. But it is not time for the victory dance yet. I think it just shows that some of the initiatives designed to address this menace of crude oil theft are beginning to show results. We're beginning to see that some of the changes made, such as improvements in the security architecture, as well as the signing of security arrangements with local entities, some of those efforts are probably, of course, clearly paying dividends now, but we must increase those efforts. We must ensure that we are pursuing them coherently, such that we can sustain the progress made and we can even achieve greater results.
Some people are not very comfortable with the approach that the federal government has taken, and the NNPCL at this point, engaging the private sector for the security. Some people are not very comfortable with that. What's your take? What's your perspective?
Of course, it's not an ideal situation. The primary function of government is to ensure security of lives and property. So when that primary function is delegated to an entity, it shows that perhaps government has struggled to be able to discharge it alone. But the most important thing for a country is, and for Nigeria, as a matter of fact, is to ensure that at least we are securing our assets, we are securing, the primary driver of our economy. So, of course, ideally, that security responsibility should be undertaken by government. But the results so far shows that, and of course, in many countries, it is always better to undertake this whole public-private partnership approach to security. So if government is partnering with private entities and it's yielding results, then we should be optimistic about that. And of course, with time, we will see a situation whereby government will be able to bear more of that responsibility alone, rather than leaving it in the hands of private entities. But I think I'm a very practical business lawyer, and I am focused on results. And I think the results we see so far are encouraging, and we should commend those efforts.
Cost the country anything other than the finance, the fee being paid to this private sector? I know when the amount came up, that was another hoo-ha, reaction that came with that. But other than that, does it cost the country anything? Does it chip off our image, our brand, or, in that area?
You mean in terms of
engaging the private security?
Yes, in fact, in terms of when you look at the attractiveness of the country to external, to investors generally, it's not really reassuring that government is not able to secure assets and infrastructure. It's not a positive sign. But of course, the most important thing is to achieve stability in the market. And if the current approach is leading us to that stability, then we should study why it is achieving results and try and ensure that we sustain it. And of course, there is no regulatory approach that is perfect. There are imperfections in every regulatory approach. So the primary function of stakeholders in the energy sector is to refine every approach that we are undertaking and ensure that we remove those imperfections and fine-tune them. So I think I understand the concerns by stakeholders that why should government delegate responsibility. Of course, there are international reputation concerns and all of that. Those are true. But I think the positive aspect of what is working now, we can refine it. And as we learn lessons from whatever it is that we're doing right now and is yielding those results, we can then refine it and make sure that going forward, we can adapt those lessons to ensure that even governments will then be able to take those responsibilities on 100% in the near future.
All right, talking about sustenance and in the future, the federal government is projecting that the country will hit 1.6 million barrels from next year. Is this realistic from your perspective?
It's quite an ambitious projection. If we are going to achieve it, there are a lot of things that need to be done. We cannot just wish it into existence. And I say that because achieving those projections would depend on a number of factors. Number one, to what extent are we able to continue to improve the security situation around the oil-producing areas? That's number one. Number two, to what extent are we able to ensure that even some of the security arrangements in place continue to be implemented with all fidelity with the ideas behind them? Number three is that, to what extent are we able to even ensure that other aspects of oil and gas production are improved to ensure that investors have confidence in our market? Because increasing production is determined by a lot of things. To what extent are investors, financial market participants willing to finance some of these operations? There are also other factors that we have to keep in mind. For example, there is a reduced global appetite for oil and gas financing generally. These are factors that will determine whether we meet those projections. So I think while those projections are quite ambitious, I think if we take the right steps to work towards securing some of those factors that I mentioned, then we may be very, very close to achieving them. But as of today, we have a lot of work to meet those projections.
All right, so if Nigeria does not hit that 1.6 million, I guess one of the consequences will be less revenue for funding the budget and then more borrowing.
Exactly. I mean, those would be the unfortunate implications, because we still run an economy that depends a lot on those revenue. And if we cannot achieve meet the projections, then it will mean less financing, and it would mean resorting to borrowing. And of course, it will also mean some of those infrastructure projects that are ongoing. It might be difficult to sustain them. It would have wide-ranging impact, and that's why I think one other factor that we must continue to put on the table is the need for whole-scale economic diversification by strengthening other key sectors. For example, the progress made in diversifying to mining solid minerals should be sustained, such that we can have an economy that does not depend 100% on oil and gas revenue.
So there's something the NNPCL said some time ago, which I think is kind of worrying, even though it's not new. The NNPC Limited had said that it is working to address the lack of coordination among oil sector players, from regulators to security agencies to host communities, private sector. outfits. Now, we have heard between the customs, the Ministry of Finance, even the CBN and the Ministry of Finance, you know, so this lack of coordination among agencies, especially when they're operating in one sectors, it brings some kind of disruption to the growth of the sector.
You're very correct. You know, the truth is that whether we're talking about oil theft or insecurity, these are multi-dimensional and multi-layered problems, and we must approach them through that lens. And the only way we can approach a multi-dimensional problem is through multi-stakeholder cooperation and partnership. For example, the issue of oil theft, you know, it's a security issue. It's an economic issue. It's actually also a foreign diplomacy issue. And I say this, the reason why oil theft is increasing is because there's a market for it. Where is the oil going to? That is a foreign diplomacy issue. You know, so the countries that are receiving that oil, you know, we have to, you know, ensure that we get the buy-in of even our foreign policy to ensure that we are able to stop that outflow. So you see that there is just so many dimensions to such a problem. And that's why it is important to get the buy-in of all the stakeholders that are involved, whether we're talking about the security agencies, whether we're talking about transparency entities like NEITI, or we're talking about human rights bodies, or even talking about our foreign affairs unit. We have to get everyone on the table to have a multi-stakeholder approach through an MOU that brings everybody on the table to say, this will be your role, this will be your responsibility, and this is how we're going to measure that you're performing those roles. And if we can do that, then we will be achieving progress. But what we see today is the direct opposite, and that's why the statement by NNPCL is very correct. There is a need to increase that stakeholder engagement, stakeholder approach, multi-stakeholder partnership that will lead us to blocking all the loopholes that make it very, very easy for you know, agents that weaken our economy to be able to steal our common patrimony and do damage to our economy. So I think I agree that we need to bring all the stakeholders to the table, and we need to allocate clear responsibilities with clear timelines and ensure that we're all making progress in the right direction.
Yeah, because it's not just an oil sector challenge in the country. Do we say that it's, you said allocates their roles, the different role. Is it the confusion in vision, or is it every agency or different agencies or ministries have their different focus and targets, and that's why the clash comes on?
There are many aspects of it, and you've touched on some of them. One of them, you know, one key aspect is when the agencies are not communicating with each other. And that may not be because of malice, it's just because they don't understand how their responsibilities overlap. So, for example, you know, when you work in the energy sector, it's very, very difficult for you to think maybe you have any human rights responsibility, because you say, well, this is not the human rights agency, go to the human rights agency. But in reality, these things, you know, they intersect a lot. And so I think one thing is because maybe several of the agencies may not be communicating with each other enough. And that means they are not, you know, engaging in what we call joint programming, developing joint initiatives to address common problems. And that also means they are not, you know, engaging in information sharing. So, for example, in many countries, there will be the possibility of having a common database whereby agencies can actually track progress on multiple issues at the same time. So you don't have to be in the ministry for you to access information on something. So these are initiatives, you know, information sharing, interoperability, having, you know, common programs, common initiatives. These are activities, deliberate activities that will mean that agencies that have similar roles and have responsibilities in ensuring transparency in a sector can talk to themselves more, work together more, and then align their priorities. So I think if we can think of it in that holistic manner, we will start making progress in addressing the problems that NNPCL identified.
So who should coordinate this, you know, this big picture that we are talking about? After all, everybody's working for the growth of the Nigerian economy. So who should do it?
I think there's a big role for the federal government in this. You know, and in the past we've had similar approaches. And I'll give you a very recent example. When when the COVID-19 pandemic was at its peak, the federal government set up a presidential committee to look at the issue, and they were able to draw in stakeholders from almost every sector, every ministry, every department that is involved in that issue. So now the federal government has identified crude oil theft as a national security issue. So the next step might be to then draw together these key bodies that we've talked about through another, presidential, initiative that will bring the key stakeholders together to look at the issue with one common eye and to look at the roles and responsibilities that they will have. I think if the federal government can allocate those responsibilities, it will be a very strong platform through which each entity will take their responsibilities seriously and discharge them accurately.
All right, Professor Damilola Olawi, SAN, thank you so much for sharing your time with us this morning and sharing your thoughts too. We do hope that the federal government add this to their federal responsibility, and we will eventually see the result of it. And have a safe trip back to Nigeria when you're ready to come back from Qatar.
Thank you so much.
All right, let's take a break now. We're still talking commodities. We'll still talk about oil, but this time to have a global perspective. That's after the break here on Business Morning on Channels Television.